Alright, so today I want to talk about something that keeps coming up more and more, especially if you're paying attention to what institutions are saying rather than just watching price charts. And that is tokenisation. Because if you've been around crypto for a while, you'll know this word isn't new. We've heard it before. But what is new is who's talking about it, how they're talking about it, and what kind of real world things are now actually being tokenised. And the big question I want to explore in this video is, could tokenisation be the utility that finally pulls crypto into real mass adoption? Not hype adoption, not retail speculation, but genuine structural adoption. Before we go any further though, if you're new here, welcome, I'm Paula. On this channel, we talk about crypto, markets and macro in a grounded way. No moon promises, no fear mongering, and no pretending this space is simple. If that sounds like your thing, make sure you're subscribed. Now, let's talk about tokenisation, what it actually means and why some of the most powerful people in finance are suddenly obsessed with it. At its simplest level, tokenisation is just the process of taking something that exists in the real world, a diamond, a bar of gold, a house, a bond, a fund, and representing ownership of that thing as a digital token on a blockchain. That's it. No magic, no buzzwords, just digitising ownership. But the reason this matters so much is because ownership in the traditional financial system is slow, fragmented, expensive, and full of friction. It's locked behind intermediaries, paperwork, settlement delays, clearing houses, time zones, and legal bottlenecks that most people never even see, but absolutely feel. Tokenisation changes that. Because once ownership lives on a blockchain, suddenly a lot of things become possible that just weren't before. Assets can be divided into tiny fractions. They can be transferred instantly. They can settle 24/7. They can be verified transparently. And in many cases, they can be traded globally without needing layers and layers of middlemen. And this is the part people often miss. Tokenisation isn't about making everything crypto native. It's about making real-world assets work better. This is why the conversation has shifted away from NFTs and memes and towards things like treasuries, funds, commodities, and trade assets. Because those are the things that actually matter to the global financial system. And that brings us to Larry Fink. Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world. They manage over $13 trillion, not billion, trillion. So when Larry Fink talks about the future of finance, it's not a theory. It's not a prediction from the sidelines. It's a roadmap. And over the last year, he's been very clear about one thing. He believes tokenisation is the next generation of markets. He's talked openly about tokenising everything from funds to equities to real estate. He's described a future where assets live on blockchains, settle instantly, and move more efficiently than they ever could in the current system. And importantly, BlackRock isn't just talking. They already run tokenised funds on-chain. They're already experimenting with blockchain settlement. They're already positioning themselves for a world where financial assets don't just exist in databases and spreadsheets, but as programmable tokens. That should tell you something. Because institutions don't move fast, they don't chase trends, and they definitely don't rebuild infrastructure unless the payoff is massive. So when someone like Larry Fink says tokenisation could reshape global markets, what he's really saying is this. The current system is inefficient and blockchain offers a better set of rails. And this is where crypto's role starts to look very different from how most people think about it. For years, crypto's been framed as either a speculative asset class or a parallel financial system trying to replace the old one. But tokenisation introduces a third path, crypto as infrastructure, not the thing you gamble on, but the thing everything else runs on. And we're already seeing this play out in real examples. Take the Diamond tokenisation project on the XRPL. This isn't about NFTs or collectibles. It's about taking real physical diamonds, assets that already have strict supply chains, certification, and high value, and giving them a digital identity on a blockchain. That means ownership can be verified instantly. Transfer can happen faster, liquidity can be introduced where previously it didn't exist, and settlement becomes far more efficient. Diamonds are a perfect example of this kind of use case because they're valuable, portable, globally recognised, and historically liquid. Tokenisation doesn't change what a diamond is, it changes how it moves. And that's the key theme here. The same thing is happening with gold. Tokenised gold products already exist, where each token represents a specific amount of physical gold stored in a vault. These tokens trade 24/7. They settle instantly, and they give people exposure to gold without needing to deal with storage, transport, or intermediaries. That's not a future concept, that's live. When you've got tokenized treasuries and funds, things like US government bonds being wrapped into on-chain tokens that generate yield and can be transferred globally, these are not risky experimental assets. These are some of the safest instruments in the world, now living on crypto rails. And when you step back and look at all of this together, a pattern starts to emerge. Crypto isn't just creating new assets anymore, it's becoming the settlement layer for existing ones. This is where another really important question comes in, and it's one people don't ask often enough. What blockchains are these things actually built on? And more importantly, why those chains? Because it's not random. If you look across tokenization projects right now, you'll notice a pattern. Different blockchains are being chosen for very specific reasons, depending on what kind of asset is being tokenized and what problem needs solving. A lot of tokenized funds, treasuries, and financial products are being built on Ethereum or Ethereum connected networks. That's not because Ethereum is cheap or fast. It's because it already has deep liquidity, established custody solutions, and an ecosystem that institutions are familiar with. Ethereum is where the money already is. Stablecoins live there, DeFi liquidity lives there, institutional on-ramps already exist. So if you're a fund manager tokenizing a money market product, Ethereum makes sense as a starting point because distribution matters. But then you look at other use cases like trade assets, commodities, or settlement heavy flows, and you see different chains being chosen. Algorand, for example, shows up in a lot of agricultural and trade tokenization, not because it has the biggest community, but because it offers deterministic finality, predictable fees, and very clean asset issuance. For real-world businesses, knowing exactly when a transaction settles and how much it costs is more important than hype or decentralized apps. And then there's XRPL. The reason XRPL keeps appearing in things like payments, remittances, and now diamonds is because it was designed from day one as a settlement network. Fast ledger closes, very low fees, built-in mechanisms for issuing and exchanging assets. It's not trying to be everything, it's trying to move value efficiently. When you step back and look at this, you realise something important. Tokenization isn't picking winners based on narratives, it's picking tools based on function. And that leads to the next question everyone's thinking but rarely says out loud. Does this actually add value to these blockchains? And could that show up in price? The honest answer is potentially, but not in the way people expect. Utility doesn't automatically equal price appreciation. We've learned that the hard way in crypto. But sustained real-world usage does something very important. It creates structural demand. If a blockchain is being used as settlement infrastructure for real assets, that means transactions are happening consistently, fees are being paid regularly, and the network is doing actual economic work. That's very different from speculative bursts of activity that come and go with market cycles. Over time, if that usage grows, it can start to anchor value in something more fundamental than hype. And this is where the Bitcoin conversation comes in. Because for most of crypto's history, everything has moved with Bitcoin. Up, down, sideways, Bitcoin sneezes and the whole market catches a cold. But tokenization introduces a possibility we haven't really had before. Decoupling based on utility. If certain blockchains are being used as infrastructure for real-world assets, they may start responding more to adoption, partnerships, and usage metrics than to Bitcoin's price alone. That doesn't mean Bitcoin becomes irrelevant, far from it. Bitcoin is a monetary asset, a store of value, a macro hedge, it's digital gold. But it doesn't need to be the settlement layer for everything to remain relevant. In fact, you could argue that Bitcoin staying focused on what it does best, being sound, scarce, neutral money, is exactly why it can stay relevant while other chains handle utility. The mistake people make is assuming crypto has to be one thing. It doesn't. We're likely moving into a multi-layered system where Bitcoin is the base monetary asset and other blockchains handle different types of economic activity: payment, settlement, tokenized assets, smart contracts. And tokenization accelerates that separation of roles. So instead of asking, will this kill Bitcoin? The better question is, does this allow crypto to finally grow up into an actual financial stack? Because if blockchains become the rails for real-world assets and Bitcoin remains the anchor asset of the ecosystem, those things don't compete, they complement. And that's a much more mature and a much more realistic future than the idea that one chain does everything. If blockchains become the rails on which real-world assets move, then crypto stops being niche, it stops being optional, it becomes infrastructure. Now, does this mean everything suddenly flips overnight? No, of course not. There are regulatory hurdles, legal frameworks still need to catch up, custody compliance, and jurisdictional rules all matter, especially when you're dealing with trillions of dollars. But the direction of travel is very clear. Central banks are exploring tokenized collateral, asset managers are launching tokenized products, governments are experimenting with blockchain settlement, and major financial players are openly saying this is where things are heading. So could tokenization be the utility that finally brings crypto into mass adoption? Honestly, I think it might be the most realistic candidate we've seen so far. Not because it's exciting, not because it's flashy, but because it solves real problems for powerful institutions. It gives them efficiency, speed, transparency, cost reduction, global reach. And when institutions adopt infrastructure, everything built on top of that infrastructure benefits. Crypto doesn't need everyone to love it. It just needs to be useful. If you're listening to this and thinking, I wish there were more conversations like this in crypto, less hype, more context, that's actually exactly why we set up the UK Crypto Podcast. Because trading and investing in crypto as a retail participant can feel incredibly isolating. There's a lot of noise, a lot of extremes, and not many places where people just slow things down and talk through what's really happening, from macro and regulation to market structure and psychology. Join me and Milkshake Matty weekly on the UK Crypto Podcast. We go much deeper into topics like this. We break down what institutions are doing, how global events feed into crypto markets, and why narratives like tokenization actually matter, without pretending any of this is simple or risk-free. So if you want longer, more thoughtful conversations around crypto and markets, you'll find the podcast right here on YouTube or on Spotify. It's there for you when you want to zoom out and really understand the bigger picture. If this video helped you see tokenization differently, give it a like. It really helps the channel more than you'd think. And if you want more content that connects crypto, macro, and real-world finance in a way that actually makes sense, make sure you're subscribed. Drop me a comment as well. What do you think gets tokenized next? Property, art, carbon credits? Something we haven't even thought of yet. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.